It's weird. When I first started liking classical music, I just assumed all the music had existed eternally, forever. I hadn't realised what a chaotic and disorganised place the past actually is. Take this example. Shine is an excellent film I saw in the cinema in the 1990s. A new film, I thought, but with a very old soundtrack. Little did I realise Vivaldi's Gloria had been lost for centuries and had only been played in its entirety in the 1950s, not long before this film was made. I'm fine. I know, Daisy. Which means today, I'm going to tell you about 5 famous rediscoveries of music. Not all of these stories are the same. The story behind the rediscovery of this and much more Vivaldi is a complicated one. Essentially, a trove of Vivaldi manuscripts were divided in two after the composer's death in 1741. Half of those works ended up in Dresden, where they were found in a cupboard behind a church organ that hadn't been opened in over 100 years. 100 years! Imagine the dust. Actually, dust is mostly human skin, so wouldn't necessarily be loads of dust, but we're getting off the beaten track. The rest of the Vivaldi collection were found in chests by monks in a monastery in Turin. In 1926, they contacted the musicologist Alberti Gentili, who realised what a treasure trove this was, and it included autographed editions of his works. There was so much in this collection that it constituted one of the most important discoveries ever of musicology. But even then, the works couldn't be made public. Copyright claims, with attempted help from the American fascist poet Ezra Pound, and the inconvenience of a major world war, meant the Gloria itself wasn't performed unabridged until the 1950s. Remarkable. One of the issues is that really until the 19th century, composers just assumed the next generation would forget them and their works, as indeed the next generation usually did. It wasn't really until Beethoven and the 19th century that composers began to realise the future might actually be interested in them. Let's take a classic example. Johann Sebastian Bach died in 1750, but it wasn't until 100 years later that musicologist Siegfried Denn unearthed the scores of the 6 Brandenburg concertos, composed over 120 years earlier, and presumably unplayed. Or at least, I believe so. You see, there may have been performances of the works between these times. It's something I've just not been able to find out. Wikipedia isn't sure, ChatGPT isn't sure, I have to confess, I'm not sure. So, if someone out there truly knows, please tell me in the comments. Whatever, the discovery was a huge treasure trove for musicology. A personally autographed score written out in Bach's own hand and including his own covering letter to the Margrave of Brandenburg. It's an irony that these famous celebrated concertos now bear the Margrave's name, since he never replied to Bach's letter and almost certainly never even heard the concertos. Okay, that's 2 big beasts we've dealt with. Now, a more minor classic, but a classic nonetheless. Haydn's second cello concerto was presumed lost until 1961, when musicologist Ulrich Pulket discovered a copy of the score at the Prague National Museum. At first, doubts were raised about the authenticity of this work, but now most experts believe the work is authentic Haydn. And I've got to say this is an interesting one, because if you listen to the music, it doesn't sound possible to forge it. It's just too good. Next up is a more recent work. The Jazz Suite for Jazz Orchestra No. 2 was composed by Shostakovich in 1938, actually under instruction by the communist regime.
We have decided, for 9 months, jazz music is cool. compose some.
We may be more acquainted with the first suite for jazz, which contains the celebrated Waltz No. 2, made famous by Kubrick's Eyes Wide Shut. Music known sometimes incorrectly as the Jazz Suite No. 2. It's not, it's the Jazz Suite No. 1, Waltz No. 2 for the record. The actual Jazz Suite No. 2, or at least its score, was lost during World War II. But in 1999, a piano score of the work was rediscovered. 3 movements were reconstructed by Gerard McBurney and premiered at the Proms in 2000.
The score was lost until 2 years ago when the rough sketches suddenly turned up. The composer's widow, Irina, asked the British composer and Shostakovich expert Gerard McBurney to make a performing version, and it's going to have its premiere here tonight.
Russia, due to its turbulent history, is ripe ground for the losing and the rediscovering of music. The work was assumed lost in the kerfuffle of the Russian Revolution until, guess what, a librarian rediscovered the work in St. Petersburg. This is why libraries are important.
It's called musique funèbre, funeral music. And it was written for the funeral of Rimsky-Korsakov, who was Stravinsky's teacher.
It's not a mighty work, but it's always satisfying finding those little things that get lost. While we're gloating about these musical rediscoveries, we should perhaps spare a more humble thought for the 3 Bach Passions, the 5 Monteverdi operas, and of course, so much more that has been lost to the waste paper basket of history. Also lost, apparently, was Bellini's opera, Pesci d'Aprile. The rediscovery of the work was announced by the opera critic Fred Plotkin, reporting that it had been found in a fishing vessel entombed in lava crust just off Sicily. Unfortunately, the score itself never turned up. You see, Plotkin had announced the discovery on April the 1st, and Pesci d'Aprile is Italian for April Fools. Although, I've got to say, judging by photographs of Plotkin, I'd be pretty surprised if he fooled anyone. Please like and subscribe.